morning. Thank you all for inviting us. With us today also on the panel, and I thought that we're going to introduce her as well, is Ms. Liz Fazio, the Committee Director for House and Natural Resources, and also for the Advisory Committee, somebody that I've always enjoyed working with very closely. We've been talking about sharing this presentation and how we would approach it, because if you step back and you look at the information you'll be provided, it's going to look like, well, okay, Carlos talked about that, or Liz covered that. Why is it that they're repeating themselves? We're actually trying to approach this from different vantage points. So I'm going to give my presentation from the perspective of what is it that the Water Development Board is doing to implement House Bill 4. Liz will give you a perspective of what it took in the discussions that were had during the actual development of the statute that gives us this great opportunity going forward. And time being allowed, we will be happy to entertain some questions at the end. So with that, let's see if this will work. There we go. That works. I'm here, thank you again. I'm here representing the Water Development Board. You know, we, like many things in Texas that follow a drought, you know, the water law in Texas changes. The Water Development Board was created following the drought of record of the 50s, and since then we've been able to lend out or provide financial assistance in excess of $14 billion that have placed Texas in a position to better respond to drought conditions going forward. But clearly the magnitude of what House Bill 4 and what the legislature did in being able to move the state water plan is critical for how we're going to be able to meet our demands and our needs into the future. So both for our perspective, Liz is going to talk to you more in depth in her presentation. We shared our presentations, and I think we know what each one of us will be covering. In fact, I'm positive we could each give our own presentation. What I'm going to talk a little bit about is how it is that we got where we are and what it is that we're implementing. Liz will talk also about what historically we have learned from water planning in Texas and how that rolled into the development of House Bill 4. If you're waiting to hear the magnificent financial incentives that are in House Bill 4, Liz will cover those during her presentation. But more to the point, here's what our future water projections are for Texas. So while we know that we're going to continue to increase in population and that will increase the demand for water, we know where those sectors, so those water user groups, will be impacted. You see a decline in irrigation. There's a lot of reasons to explain that. One is water availability, but one is also as you move out and you develop somebody's farmland into somebody's subdivision, you move that water use into the municipal sector as well. When you collectively look at all of the water user groups that are increasing their water consumption rates over the next 50 years, we end up, and again, this number has been talked a lot about in the last couple of weeks, but we end up with a shortage of about 8.3 million acre feet. Again, on the bar graph, on the line graph that you see being displayed today, you see where those sectors are that are being impacted. Our goal, our responsibility is to make sure that we do everything that we can to meet those needs of all of the water user groups. When you're dealing with something of this magnitude, you cannot be picking winners and losers. You got to try to find a way to meet the demands of all of the user groups that are there. And what you'll also see going forward, that there's also tremendous opportunities for partnership between water user groups that allow us to meet our demands going forward. You know, when we talk about the state water plan and we talk about House Bill 4, the number that a lot of folks hear a lot is the $53 billion. And that's part of the pie that you see represented up there. But if you look at the state water plan in total, it's really $231 billion. House Bill 4, with the issues that Liz and I are going to talk to you all about today, is focused on the $53 billion, but we cannot lose sight of the other demands and pressures that will exist and continue to exist for all of our water user groups and communities. So you see a cost of about $81 billion for wastewater collection and treatment. These are costs that entities, communities, for example, will have to undertake over the same period to be able to enhance their capacity to treat water, and also water treatment as well, also coming in about $89 billion, and you also have flood control. So the totality of the pressures in Texas for water, based on the 2012 plan, is represented by the graph that you see here today. Now, what I'm going to do is talk to you about our perspective in the implementation of House Bill 4 in the next few slides. Again, Liz will give you the historical perspective of what it took to get the legislation passed. So again, the reason that we're so busy this year implementing House Bill 4 and the great challenges that it provides us and the opportunities are these three bills that you see on the slide itself. Really, all of our work right now is being focused on House Bill 4 implementation. The other two bills are self-implementing. We all showed up to the polls, those of us that care to vote, on November 5th, and 73% of Texans approved Prop 6 that allowed $2 billion to be moved over. And again, that has already occurred, and Liz will talk more in detail as to the thought process that went behind it. We're really busy a couple of blocks from here at the board implementing all of the provisions of House Bill 4. You know, one of the main topics that it called for is if you're going to give an agency $2 billion and charge it with an incentivizing the development of water for Texas, the legislature took it upon itself to change the governance of the board. So we moved from a 6-member volunteer part-time board to a 3-member full-time board, and all of us were appointed as starting September 1. We're looking forward to working very, very closely, and again, this is one of my favorite parts of the bill, with the advisory committee that was created under House Bill 4. There's a, you know, in talking about the need for this money and talking about how it's going to be used, one of the key words that it's inescapable in the bill is the transparency that it calls for and the oversight. And key to that is the work that the advisory committee has already begun to look at, and that we will be visiting with them here very shortly. I think our first meeting with the advisory committee is on June 2nd. And we look forward to their review of the activities that we have done and their guidance on the activities that we should undertake going forward. House Bill 4 also created SWIFT and SWERF. Liz will talk in greater detail about the various models of that works. I'll cover some of those in my slides as well. The bill's also directed for us how we can utilize our funds, or how we should utilize the funds. And very important as well, the prioritization process that we're busy about right now defining in our rules going forward. Again, the objective of the SWIFT is to provide financial assistance to ensure an adequate water supplies for Texas. One of the things that became very apparent to us is also it's in the wisdom of House Bill 4, is the fact that SWIFT is going to have to be different things at different times. It's going to require very active management of the fund. And it's going to require that because while we may think we know what the markets may do over the next 50 years, the reality is we don't know what the markets will do 6 months from now. And so based on market conditions, based on where the prioritization comes in, based on change conditions that we will see over the next 50 years, those all can affect the capacity of the model that we will have to manage. And because of that, we're going to have to be very flexible in our rules going forward to be able to be dynamic in how we will structure the SWIFT. Again, I also think that that is why the legislature chose to go with a full-time board as well. This is the only representation I will show you on how the funds are going to flow to and from the SWIFT and the SWERF and to our other programs. Liz will get into this in much, much greater detail during her presentation. But again, if you read the statute, it shows how we can structure the funds, how we can utilize the funds, how we can move potentially the money to the existing programs that we have, or more importantly, structure loans, utilizing particularly the SWERF, to look like the other programs that we have as well. All of it's being supported by the investments and the returns that we get on the SWIFT and the payments that we get back on both the SWIFT and the SWERF as well. Again, the SWIFT was exclusively created to support projects in the state water plan. Read another way, if you have an idea on how to meet future water needs in Texas and your idea is not in the state water plan, we can't consider it, we can't prioritize it, we can't fund it. So this leads to a very important question is, well, if that is the case, what does it take to amend a plan? Can I amend a state water plan to be considered now? I don't want to wait until the next iteration of the state water plan for my idea to be prioritized. My change conditions in Texas have changed so much since you guys last adopted the state plan that we need to move things forward. I'll tell you, a couple of months ago, the board was undertaking the funding of a project that originally was slated to be considered in 2020. But because of change conditions that occurred in Texas, that project was needed today. Those things occur. And so the fact is you can amend a state water plan. It has occurred many times before. It's occurring right now. That is perfectly okay, but there are some hoops you have to jump through to get that done. You have to go back to your regional water planning groups. You have to discuss the change conditions that leads to justify why the regional water planning group should consider this amendment. They get to vote on whether or not to amend their plan, submit that to us. One of the things we wanted to make sure is, because everything that we're doing right now is precedent setting, is that we are as flexible as possible in facilitating these changes going forward. And so we're already aware of a couple that are being considered. Earlier in my presentation, I talked to you about a potential shortage or a need out to 2060 of about 8.3 million acre feet. Whatever the number that makes you comfortable is, we know that there are no magic bullets. There is no way to get to that level of water by implementing only one strategy. And fortunately, because of the work that has been occurred in the legislature over the last several years and several sessions, and the regional planning process that we have, we've identified the regional planning groups have identified various strategies that they can put into place. And so we know that as we go forward, it's going to require a myriad of various water management strategies to be able to get there. We know, and obviously this received a tremendous amount of interest during the legislative session, and it has received a tremendous amount of interest during our rule development, that a good portion, about a third of our needs can be met by water conservation and reuse. And as I travel Texas, there's some folks that have been asking me, is there a difference between conservation and reuse? Absolutely, there's a difference. And so we need to target both. There's some folks that think we can get more than a third, and I'd love to see that occur, because it is also the cheapest water we will ever have, that we'll be able to get, because it's the cheapest water we already have today. All we got to do is learn how to use it in a better way. So you see, while it represents about a third of our needs could come from conservation and reuse, capital costs on it are only about 12% of the total cost. We have other surface water strategies. Again, water we already have, but learn how to use it in a better way. And this includes moving it from where it is to where it isn't. This does represent about a third of our needs going forward. There's several other examples that I could give you, but it represents about 45% of our total costs. We also are going to have to develop new supplies of water. Here's where brackish desal, here's where aquifer storage and recovery, here's where reservoirs are going to be considered. Again, a third of our needs can be met from that, and it also represents about 43% of our total cost. The point that we're trying to drive is we are going to be in every one of these sectors to be able to meet our future demands. One of the things that is in House Bill 4 that has drawn a lot of questions to the board is, why are you excluding public-private partnerships? Well, we're not at all. We are going to lend money to public subdivisions and not-for-profit water supply corporations, but it doesn't prohibit them from entering into public-private partnerships to be able to leverage the local funding that's available to make these water projects move forward. And so we like to stress that every time that we talk about the issue. Leading up to the election, and Liz is going to give you a historical of how these two boxes got to be in this slide, but leading up to the election in November, we got a lot of questions about, why do you need $2 billion in cash from SWIFT and taking out of the rainy day fund if in 2011 we gave you authority for $6 billion? So why is it that you need 8? Well, a couple of things are wrong with all of those questions. It's not additive. We don't have $8 billion. One is authority to go issue debt, a credit card we haven't used, but we're gonna. The other one is actually cash to be able to pay for some of the debt service for that debt we're going to incur. You cannot get to where we want to be in 50 years from now if you do not leverage these two funding options. And that is the work that we're discussing with the advisory committee, with their staff members, internally with the board, within the board itself and the staff, and also with our underwriters as well. So again, a different way of representing it, and again, Liz is going to show you the diagram that was discussed during the passage of House Bill 4 that goes into even greater detail on how all these funds are going to flow back and forward, and how it is that you do in fact get from $2 billion to approximately $27 billion over a 50-year horizon. But again, keep in mind, under careful, constant, active management of the funds itself. So the $2 billion is the cash that you now have that was critical in being able to incentivize the development of these projects moving forward. And so you got part of it going up to SWIFT, State Water Implementation and Revenue Fund for Texas, and then also the SWIFT itself can also be used to leverage for GO bonds itself. One of the questions that we get asked is, how are you going to pick where the money is going to go? This is separate and apart from what projects you're going to fund. Which structures are you going to look at? Well, again, the wisdom of House Bill 4 gives us a tremendous amount of flexibility. If you look at the capacity that was considered by the legislature, it relied tremendously on SWIFT, and so will we. But we also know that in order to be able to build the capacities and the leverages that we need within the fund, we need to look at where the credits, the underlying credits, the folks that we'll be lending money to, where it would be best for them to go. So if you have a stronger rate of credit, a Houston, a Dallas that has a AAA credit rating just like we do, it is better for us and it is better for them that they go to SWIFT. It'll also help SWIFT when the markets rate that program rate better, and that is critical for us because it reduces our costs as well. We're busy about that work right now. But what about the underlying credit that doesn't have AAA? Where should that credit go? Well, it can go to SWIFT also. But if they go to SWIFT, they realize an additional savings coming to the board. You go, for example, if you have a community that has a BAA credit today, by accessing the credit worthiness of the state, AAA, which is the best you can get, the country wishes it had the credit rating we have, you have a differential there of about 141 basis points in today's market. So if you have an underlying credit that just isn't quite there yet, simply coming to the board to access the funds and the benefits from SWIFT will reduce the interest rate that otherwise they would have achieved by going to the market on their own. But wait, the news even gets better. Liz is going to talk to you about the additional enhanced financing options that House Bill 4 will give us. I won't cover those. Y'all need to stick around and hear that from Liz. But again, you see some of the incentives that are there and that we look forward to implementing. Now, the next few slides you're going to see again in some format from Liz. I'm going to approach them from the aspect of how is it that we are implementing the statute at the board today. You know, the bill called for very specific and short timelines following the passage of Prop 6. If we were fortunate and Prop 6 passed, and it did, again by 73%, then various timelines come into play. The very first one was that the regional planning groups, the heads of the planning groups, had to come together by December 1st of last year and develop a uniform set of standards on how to prioritize projects. We got busy working with them towards that effort, and they were able to meet that task early on. They are now applying the uniform set of standards and prioritizing their projects. They needed to answer these questions, at least answer these questions in their set of standards. All of them are critical. The three that are in the middle are the ones that are of most interest to me, although again, we're looking at all of them. But being able to test, finally, whether a project is feasible, viable, and sustainable is critical and will have an impact on how future water plans will look in Texas. This list is due to us in draft form by June 1st of this year. It will become final by September 1st of this year. House Bill 4 also directed that the Water Development Board would develop a set of rules on how we will implement the other criteria that is also called for in the prioritization of projects. You see the highest concentration or highest items to be considered in the rule up in the slide right now. I will tell you that every time I pick up the draft rule today, this is where we center, and here's where we have to change the rule every single time. We got to make sure that we get this right. One of the things that's in House Bill 4 is the undertaking of the utilization of the funds in a certain way. How we build the criteria on how we will score these projects will make sure that rural doesn't get cheated out of the process, and that we're able to try to meet the targets that are there and also meet all of the water supplies demands that are there. There's an additional set of criteria that we also have to take into account. These will be instrumental in being able for us to make sure that we're picking the right projects when they come for funding. There's also ability to also look for tiebreakers, for example, if you have projects that are tied within the process itself, emergency need for a project being one of them. This is the timeline, again, that we have been working under. It's been a very hectic timeline, but I promise you none of us at the board would change the pace that we're in right now. Election held on November 5th. The stakeholders had their prioritization done by December 1st. We are developing the rule right now that is required under statute. Our intent is to have that rule out for public comment, authorize its publication on June 26th. That means all of you will be able to see that rule for the first time and start digesting it and giving us the input on it around June 18th. Go to our website. We'll have the rule posted up there for you all to review, and please come back and tell us what you think of the rule. In discussions with the advisory committee staff members, we have already come to the conclusion that a normal 30-day comment period for the rule, when you're talking about a rule of this magnitude, it's not going to work. We are actually looking at extending that comment period, the official comment period, to something closer to 60 days so that we finish it around September 1st. Again, while we do all of this, the regional planning groups are going about prioritizing their projects. Draft form in June 1st, final September 1 of this year. The last item that you see on this timeline is March of next year. By statute, that is when we have to have the rule in place. I promise you, we have no intent, no interest in having that rule open all the way to March of next year. Our goal is to have all of our processes done and the rule adopted by December of this year, hopefully December 18th. I'm going to cover very quickly, because I know I'm cutting into some of Liz's time, I apologize for that, on some of the other things that we have done at the board to also enhance our ability to be more proactive in dealing with those that we're charged with serving. You know, you get a criticism when you deal with state agencies that you come, you talk to somebody, you lay out your problem, you think you got somewhere, you go back and work on some action items, you come back and you got to talk to somebody else the next time around, you got to start all over. We want to make sure that that doesn't occur at the board. So what we've done is you see the map of Texas with the existing 16 regional water planning groups that are there. We have made absolutely no changes there. What we did is make a change to our processes internally to make sure that when you come back from a certain part of Texas, you'll be talking to the exact same folks. And for the first time at the board, whether you're coming in for planning or design or construction, cradle to grave on any project, you'll be talking to the same team every single time. And we think that that'll help with efficiencies going forward and translate in moving the projects a little bit faster. But we also know that we all rely on science to make the best decisions possible. It drives everything we do. House Bill 4 requires that we be extremely transparent in all of our activities on our webpage. We've added a couple of new tools that we're pretty excited about. For example, you can go on our website right now, our water data for Texas, and see real-time data on groundwater levels as well. One of the things that we're looking forward in the development of the 2016 plan is how can we make what is in the plan more accessible to folks. We are looking at, actually we're implementing this already, and looking at ways to actually put the ability for you to go to our website, look at your part of the state, look at where the projected needs are going to be, and be able to look at also the various strategies that are being called for to meet those demands going forward. The board has been busy getting a lot of public comment. It is a standing item on all of our agendas that anybody that wants to come and talk to us about SWIFT, SWERFT, the rule development, anything at all, it is a standing item on our agendas every single time. But on top of that, we've gone across the state. We've held work sessions where the entire board has gone out. We've been to Conroe, to Lubbock, in Harlingen, and we're going to El Paso at the end of this month to receive comments directly from the folks that can't come to Austin and express their comments as well. And I promise you, when the rule is made public, that the board intends to continue to travel Texas to receive that very critical information coming back. The last point I'll make is also a discussion that was had during the development or the consideration of the election of Prop 6 and the implementation of the rules is don't forget rural Texas, don't forget our agricultural interests. And to that effect, we make sure that within the board we have staff that is clearly dedicated and understands rural and agricultural needs as well. We've appointed Doug Shaw as our ombudsman. Since we appointed Doug, he's traveled Texas, I think in excess of 7,000 miles, going all over the state, reaching out to this very important water user sector and making sure that we're answering their questions. That is all that I have. I do, and it's an honor for me, I do want to now introduce a very good friend of mine, Liz Fazio, who's going to talk to you about the history of House Bill 4, and then hopefully both of us will be available for some question and answer. Help me welcome Liz Fazio, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, that was a very good overview and pretty much hits on every slide that I have to present to you, which makes my job now very easy. Which way does this go?
I was hitting that one. They need to key it up.
I'm going to take a step back and talk a little bit about the state water plan and the planning process, because the legislature took into consideration the planning process very, very seriously. And the title of this presentation is about potential, and as you can hear from Chairman Rubinstein, the potential is very great to address all the needs. Certainly the presentation before us dealt with drought, which is very grim. You can look at it one of two ways. For financing the state water plan, it costs a lot of money, so that can also be grim as well, but we do have solutions and the potential is there. So talking about the state water plan, the legislature looked at what had been done in the past, and in Senate Bill 1, prior to Senate Bill 1, state water planning had been done on a statewide level beginning in around the 50s. And actually there's documents back in the 1930s to state water planning as well. In 1997, the legislature took it upon itself to look at, okay, the state has all these projects, but they're not getting implemented. So what can we do to get buy-in from the local and regional entities? And it was to create a bottom-up process through Senate Bill 1. There were a couple other bills that followed that, Senate Bill 2, which took into consideration in-stream flows, also created the Water Infrastructure Fund, which is used and valued quite a bit at the Water Development Board today, and then Senate Bill 3, which then also took a look at environmental flows. What is this all to accomplish? It's to accomplish growing population. Texas is not unique in this, this problem. In fact, most of the western states project their population near doubling over the next 50 years. So Texas is going to grow by about 83%, and that means we're going to need more water supply, and even if we didn't grow, you can see we still need more water supply. It's especially prevalent here in Central Texas. Where is the growth going to occur? It's occurring right down that corridor, the I-35 corridor. I call this Texas's continental divide. You have 80% of the water supply, or at least surface water supply, on the eastern side of Texas, and then a great need for that growing in central Texas. But Texas is also unique. It just doesn't have a line down the center of it. It also has a boot. Because if you look at the bottom of Texas, that's where a lot of the population is growing, and a lot of the need will need to be addressed as well. If Texas does nothing, and this is the very serious part of this, if Texas does nothing in the next 50 years to address its water needs, it will be short 8.3 million acre feet of water. And so when Texas looked at financing the state water plan, it looked at trying to generate nearly 9 million acre feet of water through the 2012 state water plan. This is a great graphic that the Water Development Board has put together. When we talk about state water planning, it's done on a cyclical basis every 5 years and intended to look out 50 years. This diagram actually looks at it from a 30-year perspective. And you can see all across Texas, north, east, west, south, the need, the shortage, and the population, and what the demand is going to be. So the state water plan does a few things for us, does a lot for us. It provides more than a roadmap, it provides detail. In looking at a lot of other western states, as I mentioned before, they do planning, but they don't do it to the extent that Texas does. So Texas really does have a leg up on a lot of states in the country. We have 16 regional water planning groups, and this provides, as Chairman Rubinstein said, over 562 strategies. This equates into almost 3,000 projects, a total price tag of $53 billion just for new water infrastructure. And that doesn't include the large pie, the entire pie that Chairman Rubinstein spoke to, which can knock that price tag up to $232 billion. If the water plan is implemented, 9 million acre feet of water can be produced. And again, on a cyclical 5-year planning basis. It's really important to note that when the legislature looked at financing the state water plan, it looked at what the needs were of the entities. And the entities said, the local and regional entities said, look, we can go out on our own and have our own line of credit and obtain financing in order to do a portion of this, but we're going to need help financing from Texas. The number, it looks about like half of the $53 billion, but it's important to note that it isn't just half. That $26.9 billion number, nearly $27 billion, came from detailed water infrastructure surveys that the legislature looked at in order to verify that this was actually the need. So this last session, almost a year ago, House Bill 4 was created, and it outlines the management of a new fund, the SWIFT and the SWRF, State Water Implementation Fund for Texas. And then the SWRF, you've heard us use that term, that's a revenue fund. So where entities can go out and build a project, the money and the proceeds come back right away, revenue is generated, and that pays back the bonds. So that is the purpose of SWRF. And SWIFT is there to support, through incentives, the issuance of those bonds. Prop 2, as Carlos mentioned, also plays a very important role in this, and it's to obtain more general obligation authority for the state. Now, Prop 2 attains $6 billion, and Prop 6 obtains $2 billion. But the difference between those, I'll come back to. The goals for financing the state water plan were simple: increase water supply in Texas, leverage a one-time capitalization with the bonding authority, that's that $6 billion, plus unlimited revenue bonding authority. Protect the corpus of this fund. This became a very important issue. There were several other things going on in the legislature and among other funds, and so it became really important to say we're not just going to spend down that $2 billion as quickly as possible. We're going to use it to generate other funds to help, again, and enhance the bond issuance. So it's important to protect the corpus. It's not that we're not going to spend the corpus, but we're going to spend it down as slowly as possible. And then, of course, to provide incentives to local and regional communities. So this is where the leveraging happens, and I'm just going to throw this up. We looked at cash flow models, spending the $2 billion, that first tower, down, and then also leveraging with the $6 billion. But the third part of that, which is really important, is this unlimited revenue bonding authority, and that's what's going to be happening in the SWIRF program that Chairman Rubinstein mentioned. Creation of incentives. What does this look like? What's the potential for this? So when you're talking about issuing revenue bonds and using the SWIFT to support bonds, which we've mentioned several times, it means up to providing incentives up to half of the rate that the board can achieve through bonding. So if it is true that an entity is large and has a great, also has a great credit, it's AAA bonded on the open market, they could achieve potentially a 3.5% interest rate. The board can come in, this is not mandatory that they come in and do half of that, but they can come in and drop that up to 50%. So an entity could end up paying about 1.7% interest. Over the long term, and I wish you'd kept this slide in because this is great, over the long term, when you're talking about how much does that help, dropping the interest rate or dropping or raising credit levels, I think it was on a $20 million loan over 20 years, $5 million can be saved by an entity. Multiply that by the cost of projects actually occurring, and you can see the large savings that local and regional entities can actually achieve. Another incentive is longer repayment terms from 20-year repayment terms that are in the current programs. The board also has the option to raise those to 30 years. Incremental repayments, so where a population hasn't grown just quite yet, they can start out paying a lower repayment and then stair step into the repayments as the population grows. And then, of course, deferred repayments, which is a program at the board known as state participation. And that's where there is pretty much a 0% or very low to none repayment for up to 15 years, and then it kicks in and the repayment begins. A lot of people asked questions related to, well, if we defer the payments that long, well, then the entities and the citizens, the consumers, have to pay more money because interest is growing during that period. And that can become an issue. It turns out that local and regional entities, though, are they're much more conservative with their own funds than they are with others. So they begin repayment as soon as they can. It also turns out that when you build it, they will come, but and the opposite is not true. So just because you're not building supply doesn't mean that they're not going to show up. So in entities, in the history of the programs at the board, where entities have been present and they've taken deferred loans, they actually, deferral periods up to 10 and 15 years, they've actually more often than not began repayment within 5 years. And why is that? Because the population has actually shown up, and so they can spread the rate base is there, and they can spread out the cost of the projects. So you can see how important all of these things are together. This is the 30,000-foot view. The board is broken down, the couple diagrams that Carlos has shown you break it down a little simpler, but this was the view that the legislature looked at. There's a lot going on here. Both Carlos and I can spend hours talking just about this diagram because this shows the full picture. This is the bonding issuers at the bottom. This is the communities in the middle, and this is the board essentially at the top and in the middle managing, down the middle, managing those programs. The current programs that exist are WIF, AG, state participation, and rural that are eligible to obtain financing through the SWIFT and SWIRFT. You probably will see those or something like those recreated within the SWIRFT. So it's not necessary for them to actually use those programs right now, but other accounts and other divisions similar to that can be used within the SWIRFT. What did the modeling say? The legislature did hundreds, if not thousands, of models. I know that the board has been through, several dozens at least at this point. The blue box represents the need. Remember, I mentioned the Water Infrastructure Fund finance surveys, and those became really important to the legislature to determine the exact amount that was needed from the rainy day fund. If you look between now and 2019, and it goes straight across, those numbers are in billions of the need across. When we looked at doing cash flow models, on the right side, compare the right column to the right column in the blue, you can see with cash flow, it takes a while to build up enough in order to meet the actual demands. The green is what the legislature ended up supporting, which was a reserve fund concept. And it is still missing when you compare the right columns, but it gets a lot closer. And the actuality of $15 billion between now and 2019 of projects, that amount being completed, is pretty slim to none. So if you just took it a realistic guess and said half of that number, $7.5 billion, the 5.98 really gets close. But another column to really pay attention to is the state participation column, and that's the column where entities want to borrow money with no repayment for about 10 years. And that number in itself really drags down the program. So if you offer a lot of repayment by SWIFT up front, you're gonna affect the longevity of the program overall. So eligibility and reserves, and a lot of this was talked about. In order to be eligible, you have to be a political subdivision or nonprofit. Conservation plan implementation, that was another thing that was put into the bill that was really important. We've always done conservation, well, not always, but we have done for a long time, demanded and required conservation plans, but not required those to be implemented. Now, in order to come before the board for financing through SWIFT, you have to have implemented your conservation plan. And then also you must complete an infrastructure survey. You can see how those numbers alone were really important to the legislature overall. And finally, rural and conservation reuse set-asides are targeted goals, as I like to refer to them. 10% of the projects funded to rural areas and 20% of projects funded to water conservation and reuse. I'm going to come back to those numbers in a few slides, though. Regional prioritization was talked about. Right now, it's very heavily weighted towards decade of need, which is absolutely important. I think that a lot of the stakeholder groups are looking at how this prioritization template has ended up and providing great feedback to the board as they look to adopt what that final template will be. Again, participation. Stakeholder participation is so important in this process, as well as the rest of rulemaking. Highest consideration, the legislature put this number in, and what was envisioned was that these might be weighted. An entity could come in and they could achieve one or many of these. But for instance, you would weight this on a 100% scale, 30%. If you achieved one of these, you would get 30 points. And then if you looked at this, you could achieve, there's 7 here, maybe 10 points. This is a very simplification, but this is how the legislature looked at it at the time. Maybe 10 points for each of these. So that adds up on a 100-point scale to be what a prioritization factor might look like when an entity comes in for financing. The board is, again, working through that, and all comments, again, are appreciated for the most part. So this became really important. Let's see. But there's a couple that are very important here, and the legislature was really wise in looking at this, and that is whether a project is shovel ready. It turns out, as we've gathered more information about the bond market, the non-taxable bonds are treated very sensitively, and in order for those to remain non-taxable, you have to spend the money when you get it. So Chairman Rubinstein refers to it as the contract to commitment, or
Commitment to closing.
commitment to closing aspect, and that means you have to be ready to build. That is going to be a very important factor overall. Otherwise, entities will lose that non-taxable benefit, which really spins the whole program. Additionally, demonstration of water conservation. Simultaneous to House Bill 4 going through, there were a number of other conservation bills, including a water loss audit bill, as well as a water loss audit financing bill that went through. Those bills really look at and hone in on the ability for an entity to take care of their water loss ability right now. So that demonstration of water conservation is going to play a factor into receiving financing. Essentially, if you haven't taken care of what you have already, then the board is going to look and say, hey, or I think the board might look and say, hey, you might need to take care of this or a portion of it before you go building new infrastructure. Where are the potentials? A lot of that's been stuck in, but just to recap, state versus local control. Local control has been the process since 1997, and arguably a great way to go about it, because these local entities are the ones answering the phone when the water rates go up, and at the end of the day, it is the consumer who is paying for, and the citizens who are paying for the ability to build the new infrastructure. Cyclical planning process is something that has been really great, the ability to go back every 5 years and address weather changes or infrastructure needs or cost. All of those things play in. Of course, prioritization of projects, and then resolution of conflicts as the plan is developed. There's a lot of potential for that as well. Financing-wise, the management of the corpus is very important in order to keep the program running. It is likely that the plan will increase, but we know that you can achieve over a period of time at least nearly $30 billion in infrastructure cost and financing. So it's going to be important to make that go as long and meet that goal as much as possible. Program structure, whether or not the loans are 20 years, 30 years, whether or not their loans are grants. Currently, the House Bill 4 does not allow for grants. All of those things play into, again, the longevity of the program. And then incentives, interest rates, repayment terms, all of those things as well. Of course, negotiation of interest is always on the table, and it wasn't but for the ability to address a lot of conservation needs that the legislature was able to bring together a whole lot of consensus behind House Bill 4 and Proposition 6. And then public-private partnerships, of course, are going to be very important. Rural conservation reuse set-asides, the definitions for these will be really important. It's important to note that when the legislature looked at this, in both cases, in conservation and reuse, the number of the water generated out of that is about 34%. However, financing looked closer to 12%. And when you look at financial assistance from the state, it drops even lower than that. So those numbers are going to have to be adjusted. There's a lot of potential for that and a lot of potential for people to get involved, as well as in rural definitions. The legislature, again, saw it as a goal to really address rural needs. The initial model plans that were drawn from the legislature included about 50,000 connections, which is almost an entity with 50,000 connections or less, which is almost a population of 150,000, which a lot of the legislatures look and say, that's not rural. So we dropped that number, but when you drop that number, the amount for financing also drops, and it dropped to between 5 and 6%. So again, you can see the gap there and the potential for projects to be developed and more work to be done.
Go ahead.
So you guys mentioned managing the corpus a couple times, which is obviously very important. If you're making loans at below market rates, how do you expect to not lose money at that? Because you're accepting the same amount of risk as the market would, but you're not getting paid the same amount.
We're issuing the loans based off of bond proceeds. So first, the entity has to apply and be eligible to issue a bond, and so that's going to cover the whole of the loan. The corpus of the fund then is used to support the drop in interest rates. So a sliver of that comes off. If you continue to take slivers off, yes, the corpus is spent down, but what else is the fund doing while it's sitting up there? If you separate the funds overall and you do correct management, there's ability to gain interest at a rate that is a little bit higher, and that supports the overall issuance and issuance of the bonds and then the support for the interest.
Excellent answer. The only thing I will add to that is that's part of the critical work that we've been doing right now with our underwriters. You know, one of the things that I think we both failed to mention is the fund is being managed by the Texas Safekeeping Trust. And we have an obligation to tell the trust, here's when we're going to need money. Here's how much money we're going to need by decade. Take this portion of the money and invest it and increase the yield. That is, if you're looking for the one driver in the model that impacts capacity the most, it will be the return that we get on the investments from the SWIFT. And that's where that comes from. Hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you.
Okay. Over here.
Hi, I had two questions. The first one relates to well water. How does, how does this whole system take that into account? Are you influencing the amount, because a lot of the rural water depends on private wells. Are you influencing the amount of water in those wells? Are you taking that into consideration?
I think I'm going to try to interpret your question, but we know where the two principal sources of water come from for Texas: surface water and groundwater. We all recognize the difference in how those water supplies are treated. It is not the intent of House Bill 4 to change how those waters are being managed, and wherever you have the exemptions that you already have, for those to remain in place. But to the extent that you can incentivize the development and the conservation of those sources, that's where we'll be focusing. So for example, in one of the discussions we talked about is the new sources. What if you could be able to shift power generation whenever you don't need it in the grid to develop brackish groundwater, and if the geology works right, take that treated water and inject it back into the ground for whenever you're gonna need it in aquifer storage and recovery. All of that enhances the ability to meet those future demands going forward. At the individual level, no, this does not address the individual private well at all.
Okay, and the second question that I had, it related to the first graph I think that you showed, which was basically a linear relationship for the projected water need. And so you showed a decline in the, sorry?
In irrigation.
In irrigation, and a concomitant increase, linear increase in municipal. One kind of supposes that those are just a simple subtraction in the graph, but no? Okay.
Keep going.
Anyway, so the question is this based on a average, so a projected linear population increase? That is, you're assuming an average per person water use that's proportional to a linear population growth. And so in that context, could you comment on the division between rural and municipal water use? So what is the anticipated difference per person between somebody who lives in the city versus somebody who's in a rural environment?
Yeah, I'll try to answer that lengthy question this way. You know, we give to the regional planning groups as part of their 5-year cycle future projections on water consumption rates, per capita rates, and also population increase. And I'm really proud of the work that staff has done, because they're within a fraction of a percent historically of what has actually occurred. Your question by inference is, can we do, can the future bring something different on the per capita consumption? Those assumptions are built into the model right now. Obviously, some folks will point to some communities that have done a remarkable job in reducing their per capita consumption rate. San Antonio comes as an example. El Paso is a great example. But they also fail to recognize that agriculture in itself has done a remarkable job in also conserving the water that they use. I think that in itself is built into it as well. Where the technology drives us going forward, how reuse will impact our ability to meet our future demands is something that we will be able to take up, again, as Liz mentioned, every 5 years, because it's an iterative cycle. Every 5 years we get to revisit and tune up these assumptions that are made. You want to add anything to that? Okay. Yes, sir.
I'd like to start this off saying this is a pitch for ASR. I'm very worried about most of the water planning districts include reservoirs in their planning. And you all did a study with Texas Parks and Wildlife back in the 90s saying you shouldn't have a reservoir within 100 to 150 miles of the coast because it robs the estuaries of nutrients and particulates, and you're going to lose your shrimp and fishing industry. And when you're more than 150 miles from the coast, you can lose about as much water through evaporation as you're going to be using. And so I'm not too sure if the local planning districts have been fully informed about their choices as far as using reservoirs for their water storage when there's at least the amount of water that evaporates should be subtracted from what their conservation limits are, or something to make sure that it's watched carefully.
Yeah, excellent question. That question actually comes up quite a bit. The reality is that there are a lot of reservoirs that are contemplating the plan. Whether they occur or not, remember during the presentation that both Liz and I both made, the first 5 questions that the regional planning groups are having to answer are tough questions. They really are, and the first time that they get to do that. And remember, I highlighted the viability, feasibility, and sustainability of those projects. That's where the inferences of the questions that you're asking come into play. But you could ask that of any water management strategy. You know, more direct reuse of water also has an impact on streams, does it not? And so all of that, I think all of us are cognizant of that. I think as we go through the prioritization process, those things will work out. I fully expect that as we continue to implement the strategies to prioritize projects, that some projects may fall off. And that's okay. We better have a second project because the demand will not drop. And we'll better find a better way of addressing that need going forward. Can I sit here today and tell you that, no, we're not going to be able to know the reservoir in Texas? No, I won't do that either. Because in some areas that will be the preferred answer and probably the best answer for it as well. They all come with their own unique set of challenges as well. I don't know if you want to add to that. Okay. Last question? Okay, yeah. They've been saying we're out of time, so yes, sir.
Thanks to both of you for an excellent presentation on a very complex topic. On the part of the strategy that related to moving the water from where it is to where it's needed, does the board have authority now to approve or address some of the issues about junior water rights? Is more legislation needed for that portion of the overall strategy to become implementable within the combination of the political realities and the realities of the financing world where junior rights sometimes don't get those best interest rates that you alluded to?
You want to go first?
Sure. Interbasin transfer law is statute, so any change in that would be necessary. The board has historically made recommendations for the legislature to reevaluate that. It will all depend on the members that are in the pink dome, just about half a mile down the road. So it is a legislative change, in my opinion.
No, I agree 100% with Liz, and I'll tell you, one of the other things that Liz and I get to talk about a lot is not only the provision of the junior provision here and where the decisions to change that reside, but also the attempts at the federal level to get into the business of states on how they're managing their own water. And in particularly, recently, the longstanding rule that exempted interbasin transfers from requiring an NPDES permit at the federal level was vacated by a court. It is a decision that neither one of us agrees with, but it's a decision that, if it's allowed to stand, will have a huge impact, not only to future interbasin transfers, but to the existing 350-something permits that we have. So from various angles, I promise you, we talk about this issue quite a bit, but Liz is 100% correct. That decision resides in another building that neither one of, well, you work there, I don't. Anyway, I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Thank you all. It was a pleasure being here with you all. Let's do this again. We need to go.